Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics and, how to run down the second day of the indicative votes that Parliament took upon itself to come up with something where the government has failed. Three main parts. There were 8 motions put forward, 8 things to vote for. Now, the 4 that went forward, I'll discuss in a moment. Now, a lot of Brexiteers, hardline Brexiteers, were complaining that there was nothing for them in there. But if we look at some of the ones that didn't go through. So motion A was the unilateral right of exit from the backstop. But the problem with that is, of course, if you can withdraw from the backstop, it's not a backstop. If you can do that without meeting the requirements of it. So that's not a legal proposition. It's also not a possible proposition because the EU have said no, but more on that later. Anyone who would have voted for that is either a moron or someone who doesn't want to approach these votes in a productive spirit. So that didn't really get enough support, didn't go through, even for a vote. Then there was motion B, no deal. Illegal. Enough said. Motion C, customs union, that one did go through. I'll talk about that in a moment. Motion D, common market 2.0 went through. Talk about that in a moment. E, confirmatory public vote, yep. F, public votes to prevent no deal. Now that really was like the confirmatory vote. No, it wasn't. It was like the next one, the SNP one, where you revoke rather than go for no deal, but with a bit less bite. So that one didn't go through. And then the final one was about joining European Free Trade Association, which is sort of also covered in the common market one, but it's a non-starter anyway. So if we look at the 4 that were picked, so the customs union was simply to commit to a permanent customs union. It didn't have any details about it and therefore had a certain amount of appeal. Pro and con to this. The good side is it, as all the 4 votes, if any had got a majority today, which none of them did, unfortunately, but I'll come to that as well. All of them were legal. All of them would have respected the Good Friday Agreement. And so from that point of view, all of them were sensible. The customs union, though, the downside to it, first of all, just saying a customs union. Yes, there isn't time to flesh it out now, but the reason it has such broad appeal and why it also came closest to passing again is because it can mean different things to different people. But at some point, if we went down that road, at some point, Parliament would have to agree with the EU exactly what that would mean. And at that point, all those schisms start again. So it was only a short-term sticking plaster. It was never going to be a long-term fix. If I were an MP, I would have voted for it. I would have voted for all of these today. And Labour indeed whipped for it. They actually told their MPs to vote for it as well on that basis. But it was the least good of all the options. Motion D was for Common Market 2.0. Now, the problem with this is it calls for joining the European Free Trade Association with Norway. It's the Norway deal. The problem is that Norway have told us to piss off. They don't want us in it. Fair enough. Apart from the fact we're pissing about, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is our economy is very large and would unbalance it, I believe, is the main issue there. So is this completely fruitless? Is it utterly pointless trying to vote for it? Not necessarily. Yes, we can't just sign up for EFTA, but that doesn't mean to say we can't sign up to something that keeps us in the European Economic Area on a deal very similar to the Norway deal, which means that we're sort of on our own with it. We have a similar sort of arrangement. The EU are open to it. We just won't be joining the other countries that have a similar arrangement. We'll be on our own. But it would still respect the Good Friday Agreement. It would maintain close links with the EU. It would do everything. We'd basically be like in the EU, but without any say, which I'm not in favour of. A lot of people are not in favour of. But as a compromise goes, it's a compromise. Then there was the confirmatory public vote. Now, what this does is say, basically, Parliament needs to come up with something, even May's deal, and then we put it to a vote with the public, where Remain is an option. That got the most votes. It wasn't the closest to pass, but it got the most votes. And then the final one, the SNP put forward parliamentary supremacy, as they called it, which basically said, it was a backstop. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a way forward as such. It was simply saying that if we get to the point where it's no deal, like let's say, for example, Theresa May goes to the EU Council next week and they're not impressed with her and say, right, that's it, no extension, you're out on the 12th. Parliament would then revoke Article 50. They would demand that Theresa May revoke Article 50. That's what this vote was for. It was like saying, if we end up with no deal, you're going to revoke Article 50 as a backstop for us. That didn't get very much. And in fact, the Labour Party didn't whip in favour of that. That was disappointing, I have to say. The SNP were visibly disappointed when Sir Keir Starmer had to announce that. The reason is, it's quite clear. The reasons they gave, he was just simply giving it as, well, it's not really a way forward. And it's, we want to try and find a way forward, all that rubbish. Basically, the reason is there's a significant amount of the Labour leadership will not vote for it. So if Labour whipped for it, also I suspect Corbyn wouldn't want to anyway, but it doesn't really matter. Even if he whipped for it, he would have his shadow cabinet or members of it rebelling, as they did last time. He tried to get them to vote for something like that. In fact, I think there was some shadow Labour front bench, cabinet members rebelling today as well. I haven't seen the breakdown yet, though, but I believe there have been. And he does nothing about it. He has no more control over his party than Theresa May has over hers. Theresa May just looks more foolish because she's the Prime Minister and her party is more split. Labour is not as split. The problem is that Jeremy Corbyn is on the small side of the split that is there. So that's the reason they did that. It was pure party politics because he hasn't got the strength of character to tell those rebels to piss off out of his shadow cabinet and get some quality ones in that he'll have to respect. But anyway, that's the situation of it, how they eventually went. So there were a few little points in the debates there was hours and hours of debates beforehand. I'm afraid to say rather pointless. Not because there's no point in debating something like this, because there is, it's super important. It was very important. But the problem is when I was watching these debates, the Conservative benches in particular there was probably about a third of them there, if that, maybe even a quarter. The opposition benches were fuller, but there was still plenty of room there. So there was a hell of a lot of people not there. That being said, it did make for a much more civilised debate because it is the hardline Brexiteers that are the ones who are the most unpleasant. They turn every debate into something very unpleasant. And it wasn't a pleasant civilised debate because everyone agreed with each other. No, there were Brexiteers there. There were Conservative Brexiteers there. There were even Conservative Brexiteers that were quite happy with no deal. But what there weren't there were people who disrespected other people's points of view and frothed and all the rest of it. So it was very pleasant, but ultimately pointless because the very people who most needed to engage in those debates were not there. And it went on for a few hours. Ed Vaizey, who was a Conservative MP, he did actually have some harsh words for those hardline Brexiteers who were not there at all, in terms of their hypocrisy. And he also had a warning for Parliament to vote for something. He says you need to vote for something because if you don't, that his colleagues, as he said, will do their level best to drive through a no deal. And he's right, they will. They're already putting pressure on the Prime Minister to do just that. The other half of Cabinet are putting pressure on her to do something else, but that's, looks like that's going to be, that's on the poll anyway. It looks like I might be talking about that tomorrow. Anyway. So, the situation before the votes came through was, there's an EU Council meeting next Wednesday. The Council wants to hear Theresa May's proposals. Now, it's not going to be the same as last time where she turns up, talks for an hour and a half, they all look at each other and go, what the hell was that? And then spend hours working out what to do about it. They're not going for that level of embarrassment again. They've told Theresa May she has to present her proposals before that date. So in other words, she has to send through the proposals before the council meeting. That's next Wednesday. So she has to do that on Tuesday. So the last day for Parliament to decide anything is next Monday. That's it. Whatever Parliament has decided or not decided next Monday, it's out of our hands then. It's entirely into the EU's hands. And what are they supposed to do? So in terms of the way the votes went, the DUP voted against everything. A lot of MPs voted against everything. Theresa May, she ordered her cabinet to abstain, but she sort of had to do that. It made no difference anyway. There's probably as many people would have voted for one thing as against it. So it all balanced out, I guess. But she also whipped against voting for things as well. So, And that's pointless. It's fine. I mean, I've already said MPs should not be whipped anymore for any Brexit thing. They should just be allowed to vote with their own consciences, and on all parties, just leave it at that, because the party political system has completely failed on this. But if you're going to whip to vote for something. If you're going to whip to vote against one or two of them, all right then. But tell them to vote for something at least, because that way something goes through. But she didn't want anything to go through, because remember, this was all about taking power away from her, and she didn't want that, so she blocked it. So the results: the Customs Union, 273 for, 276 against. That was the narrowest margin. Common Market 2.0, 261 for, 282 against. The Kyle motion, which is basically the confirmatory public vote, 284, 292 against. So it got the most votes for, but not the nearest to passing, because it also got more votes against. And revoking, as opposed to going out with no deal, only 191 for. Labour didn't whip for it. 292 against. So that was disappointing there. And I mean, even for the results, the government benches were not even they didn't look half full to me. They looked close to half full. So these people who couldn't be asked to turn up to the debates, couldn't even be asked to turn up to the results. They just came in from the bar, put their crosses in all the no's, and then went back to the bar or went home or whatever the hell. Couldn't even be asked with it. And that's the problem. And that's what provoked the most extraordinary point of order, because afterwards there were various points of orders. So the first person to talk was the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, who basically said Cabinet he pointed out that actually, yet again, Parliament hasn't agreed to anything. Now, what I was disappointed with, because obviously what the government are trying to do is bring their deal back. It's like, well, you got to have your say. You haven't agreed on anything, so we're going to bring ours back, because we have to agree on something, don't we? Now, Jeremy Corbyn he's sort of, you can't quibble. He basically pointed out that that nonetheless some of the things got more votes than Theresa May's deal. So why bring hers back? Why keep bringing hers back? He said it was better for on Wednesday to have more of these votes, which have done better than May's deal, than to bring May's deal back for a fourth time. But what I'd have liked to have seen him point out is the fact the only reason, because two of them were bloody close, the only reason that there was no overall majority is because Theresa May specifically whipped against things. As I say, if you want to whip for things, okay. If you've got a preference, okay. You don't whip against things. So, but I'm not going to quibble. It's not his fault. Then in Blackford, the leader of the SNP in Westminster stood up. To be honest, he went on a party political nationalist rant, but at the end of the day, what else are you going to say? There was no point in him saying anything. They debated things. It's utterly pointless. Theresa May is just blocking any progress on this. She's ordering her MPs to block all progress on it. It's very difficult for a Conservative MP to rebel against that, because one, their manifesto, they stood on a manifesto promise of the negotiated deal or no deal effectively, even though no one knew what the negotiated deal was at the time. And you don't, and a lot of them will be from Leave constituencies, by no means all. It's a tricky one. Really, this is Theresa May's fault, but anyway, whatever. Then Nigel Dodds of the DUP, the leader of Westminster of the DUP, stood up and basically said, look, the only thing that has ever gone through is the Brady Amendment. The Brady Amendment is basically removing the backstop. But that's the thing, yeah, and it got a majority because it got a load of Conservative MPs voting for it. And that's what caused Theresa May to waste 2 weeks pretending to negotiate the backstop and came back with nothing. She came back with her assurances, which added nothing to it. The backstop is still the backstop, and the backstop is always going to be the backstop, and it's not going to change. They still have this assumption that the EU will look at the situation from an economic point of view and going, hang on a minute, if we just get rid of the backstop, then they'll agree to everything else. We get to keep our trade with the UK, and that helps our businesses, and everything's sort of fine and dandy, but it screws over Ireland. Well, sod them, let them sort it out themselves. But no, that's not what the EU are doing. They've shown very clearly that's not what they're doing. Alexandra Dumas would be proud of them because it's very much been a case from the EU's point of view of one for all and all for one. And it's absolutely baffling that we would think otherwise. So the party leaders didn't, not that the Conservative Party leader said anything. Theresa May wasn't even there. She was represented by the Brexit minister. But in terms of the party leaders, Caroline Lucas stood up. I mean, even Caroline Lucas, you know, a big supporter of hers, but not in a party political sense, of course. She's in a different party, although I wish she was in Labour. Even she said something vaguely useless. She basically said, if we tacked a couple of these together, there's enough support for a people's vote. Now, Ken Clarke did have to actually say, if you tack a people's vote to my customs union, for example, you will actually lose more votes than you will gain. And actually, he's right on that. He is right on that. So, but then there was another point of order. Nick Boles, who's a Conservative MP, who has actually worked really hard to try and get something that Parliament can get behind. And he's been working hard for months on this. The major party leaders have completely and utterly failed. This is why I say party politics has failed. It's not that the party system as such can't cope with this. It's that the party leaders have singularly failed to show any leadership at all. And the reason why we even have a situation where it's quite close to getting an overall majority for something is purely and simply because backbenchers came together cross-party and fleshed things out and talked to each other. People who disagree with each other. You've got Brexiteers and Remainers talking to each other and coming up with compromises, and that's what we had. But those party leaders, okay, Jeremy Corbyn didn't block anything today, fair play there, but Theresa May did. I mean, you know, they're not helping. So Nick Boles stood up and quite defeated. He said, you know, he explained that he's worked very, very hard to try and come up with something that would be a compromise, and he has. And he said, and I've failed completely. And there was a dejection in his voice as he said it. And you could hear audible murmurs of sympathy. Because everyone there knows that he's put a massive amount of effort into this. Massive amount. And he's been frustrated. Not because he hasn't been able to come up with something that would get a majority, but because he's been blocked. And he laid the blame squarely on his own party. And he says, the reason why we haven't got a majority for something is because of the refusal of my party to compromise. And that's absolutely true. And then he crossed the floor, which basically means he resigned as a member of the Conservative Party. So Theresa May's lost another MP. Now, granted, he's a lot... I don't know whether he'll join the independent group, by the way. He didn't indicate that. He left the chamber. We don't know what's going to happen. He, just like many of the ones who have already left Labour and the Conservative Party, though it has to be said, there were a number of forces hounding him out of the party anyway. Remember, the party is lurching very much more to the right. We've already discussed the UKIP coup this weekend. And he was very much one of their targets. So, you know, it didn't take much of a nudge. But I have to say, as he did and he left the chamber, you could hear Conservative MPs saying, don't go. You know, they were dismayed. And so we'll have to see what the fallout from all that is tomorrow. That is the situation. Tomorrow's going to be another blinder. Cabinet are meeting for 6 hours. Now, I'm going to talk about something to do with that tomorrow, definitely. We'll see what the fallout from Nick Boles is. We'll see if any Conservative MPs have anything to say in the press about that as well. I suspect... as we get closer, literally, like I've said, Parliament has to decide something by next Monday. If it doesn't decide anything by next Monday, Parliament is basically allowing a no deal to happen. I'm not saying a no deal would happen, but a Parliament is... It's removing its ability to intervene if it does nothing by next Monday. Because, as I say, Tuesday, Theresa May has to send her proposals off. Wednesday is the council meeting, and that's when they're going to decide. And they could decide no. They could just... I know that the Irish Prime Minister was saying that the last council meeting, there were members who were just ready to say, let's no. And they only did it as a favour to him, as a solid to him. But there are a number of them. If they believe no deal is going to happen anyway, if we try going there without a commitment to taking part in the European elections, And I don't believe that would be forthcoming unless Parliament forces it on Theresa May. For example, if any of these had got a majority, but a small majority, she still would have ignored it. It needs to be a solid majority. And that's just what you're not seeing. You need the grown-ups in Parliament to actually just say the party system is failing, sod you, and get themselves together and say, which one are we going for? And if that means transferable votes or something else to make sure there's a winner and a clear winner, then so be it. There were plenty of MPs tonight voting for all 4 of them. All 4 of them. And it's not like they're similar to each other at all. You know, there's some MPs that are very... I mean, you know, out of all these, there's only one I approve of. But I would have voted for all 4, being whether I was whipped or not to do so. But there we are. That is the news for today. There's about to be, I think, you know, certainly tomorrow there's going to be some big news as well. Something's got to come out of that cabinet meeting. Some interesting things are going to come out of Parliament. Wednesday's going to be Prime Minister's question times. That's where she's going to have to pretend to answer questions but actually not answer anything. We'll see then as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification as well. Until next time, I'll see you later.